You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art Ed?
Try to slice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood, art Ed me?
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted Weekly Art History for All Ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today we're looking at Keith Haring. Just a reminder, I am doing daily mini episodes right now in the run-up to my annual Arts Madness tournament. Now, on to the actual topic for today's episode, Keith Haring. Keith Haring exploded onto the New York art scene in the 1980s. His simple yet powerful imagery, like the radiant baby, the barking dog, it became iconic. Haring's art wasn't confined to the pristine walls of galleries. It spilled onto subway cars, t-shirts, even a section of the Berlin Wall. He used his art to spread joy, raise awareness about critical social issues, and connect with people from all walks of life. Though his life was tragically cut short, his art continues to inspire and resonate with people globally. Now, Keith Haring was born on May 4th, 1958. He grew up in Kutztown, Pennsylvania. His parents, Alan and Mildred, fostered a creative environment. His father was an engineer, but possessed a deep love of drawing cartoons. He was one of Keith's first artistic role models. It's said that Alan would often doodle in the church bulletin during services, then pass the sheet around to the children, encouraging them to add their own drawings. I guess drawing in unexpected places and art making as a mildly transgressive but playful act was something of a family tradition. Keith spent countless hours drawing with his father, captivated by the work of cartoonists like Walt Disney. These early influences shaped his distinctive, simplified graphic style and would later become his trademark. Haring was a child who never stopped drawing, and as an adult, he kept the bright colors, the positive tone, and the direct, earnest style of youth in his mature work. Keith's best childhood friend, Kermit Oswald, said, quote, "You look across the classroom, and there are people who stand out as real dorks, and some who turn out to be kind of interesting. There was always something interesting about Keith. It was the way he dressed. It was the way he talked. It was the way he would smile, smirk, and roll his eyes. It was the way he could get himself out of trouble as fast as he could get into it. Anyway, Keith and I were always known as the artists in the school. We were both crazy about drawing," end quote. One of Keith's earliest ambitions was to become a Disney animator. But as he reached high school, he began looking at different art movements for inspiration. He experimented with abstract art. He started making little shapes that together would fill whole areas, with one shape leading into another, and with lines that seemed to flow endlessly, that could go on and on. During a church trip to Washington, D.C., Keith visited the Hirshhorn Museum, and there he saw a group of Marilyn Monroes by Andy Warhol. He was struck by the strong, flat images and looked at them for a long time. Throughout his whole high school period, he looked at art and studied art because he knew that art would be his life. Interestingly, later he would get to know Andy Warhol and even collaborated with him quite a bit. Now, after high school, Haring briefly enrolled at the Ivy School of Professional Art in Pittsburgh, but he quickly realized that commercial art wasn't his true calling. He wanted to create art that was more personal and expressive, but also socially engaged. In 1978, he moved to New York City to study at the School of Visual Arts. At SVA, he studied semiotics, the study of signs and signifiers. He was fascinated with symbols and art as visual communication. New York City in the 1970s was brimming with creativity and experimentation. Haring thrived in this dynamic environment, absorbing the city's raw energy and embracing its diverse artistic expressions. Haring was immediately drawn to the vibrant and often rebellious energy of the underground art scene. He began creating chalk drawings on blank advertising panels in subway stations. You see, back in the day, advertisement posters would be hung in the subway stations, and when the ad campaign was over, they didn't want people to get free advertisement from the posters staying up beyond the contract date. So the city would black out those spaces until new ad campaigns were booked and new posters were ready to hang in their place. Haring would make drawings using white chalk on the black surface. These ephemeral artworks, often featuring his signature radiant baby or flying saucers, quickly captured the public's attention. People were drawn to the playful style and the simple but profound messages they conveyed. Haring loved that his work would be accessible to the masses because, as he famously said, art is for everyone. The subway became Haring's laboratory, his gallery, and his most direct connection with the public. He saw the subway as a democratic space where he could engage with people of all walks of life. His subway drawings were spontaneous and energetic, mirroring the frenetic pace of the city. Of course, these subway drawings, although they were chalk drawings, were still graffiti and thus illegal. For the most part, New York City police had bigger concerns than a young artist making chalk drawings, but he was arrested for vandalism while creating his subway art. I saw an old interview where he talked about being brought down to the police station. He said the woman behind the desk looked him up and down, wondering what he could have done to get himself arrested. Then, when the arresting officer told her, she called back excitedly, telling the others in the station, "This is the kid who's been making those drawings in the subway." He said some officers even had pins of his artwork. Haring's subway drawings, initially considered acts of vandalism, eventually caught the attention of the art world. He participated in a group show, New York New Wave, which included a number of up-and-coming artists like Jean-Michel Basquiat. That show has been referred to as the Armory Show of the 1980s, ushering in a new crop of artists with fresh ideas that shook up the art establishment. Haring began to have exhibitions in established art galleries. His first solo show at the Tony Schiaffrezi Gallery in 1982 was a major success, helping to catapult him to national fame. Now, despite the great commercial success and prestige, he never forgot his roots. Haring opened a store, the Pop Shop, in New York City, where he sold t-shirts, posters, and other merchandise featuring his artwork. And he was criticized for this because he was, sort of diminishing his brand by taking it out of the rarefied air of the galleries and museums and putting his work on stuff that seemed like, fast fashion t-shirts and posters and stuff like that. It seemed beneath the quote-unquote fine arts, but his aim was to make his art accessible to everyone, not just wealthy collectors. Haring's art uniquely blurred the lines between high art and popular culture. His images were accessible and appealing to a broad audience, transcending the traditional art world's boundaries. And he used his art to address significant social issues of the day, like AIDS, homophobia, and drug abuse. But I think the thing that really appeals to me is that he wasn't just tackling these serious issues. He was conveying the messages in a way that was still positive and hopeful. He was a passionate advocate for AIDS awareness and prevention, particularly after being diagnosed with the disease himself in the late 1980s. Despite his illness, Haring continued to create art and advocate for AIDS-related causes until his death in 1990 at the young age of just 31. Among the heartbreaking details of his final days, apparently he had received a letter from the Disney company seeking to collaborate with him. It had been a lifelong dream of his to work with Disney, but he thought his friends were lying to try to cheer him up. Still, he faced his illness with remarkable positivity and hope. He saw his art as a celebration of life and a means of connecting with people, even in the face of immense personal challenges. He left behind a legacy of not only beautiful art, but a beautiful spirit. Today, the Keith Haring Foundation supports nonprofit organizations that help children and organizations that work on AIDS and HIV prevention, education, and care. Keith Haring's art remains relevant today because it speaks to universal themes of love, acceptance, and the importance of community. Now, after a short break, I always like to look at a specific work, so we're going to take a look at his three-eyed smiley face. Keith Haring's art is instantly recognizable. Bold lines, vibrant colors, and a cast of recurring characters that have become ingrained in popular culture. Among them, the three-eyed smiley face stands out as particularly intriguing and an enduring symbol. While I was at a show of Haring's work in Philadelphia a few years back, I saw that the three-eyed smiley face was what the great Bob Ross might have called a happy accident. It's said that Haring, seeking inspiration, revisited his old childhood coloring books. A How to Draw Mickey Mouse guide caught his eye. Haring misjudged the placement of one of Mickey's eyes, and instead of correcting the mistake, he leaned into it, balancing the composition with a third eye. This seemingly accidental alteration transformed a familiar cartoon icon into something uniquely Haring, a symbol that would become synonymous with his artistic identity. While I love this story, I think it's important to note that it's difficult to definitively confirm its accuracy. I mean, a museum seems like a reliable source, but I haven't been able to verify that anecdote in any other places. Haring himself rarely discussed the specific genesis of individual images, preferring to let the art speak for itself. Regardless of its precise beginnings, the three-eyed smiley face quickly became a recurring motif in Haring's work, from the early days in his subway drawings. The three-eyed smiley face, along with other now iconic images like the radiant baby and barking dog, became a part of his evolving visual language. As I think about the appeal of a three-eyed smiley, it reminds me of what Harvey Ball said about his iconic smiley face design. Ball said that he made it a little wonky with one eye bigger than the other, a little bit of asymmetry to show the human touch. There's a beauty in the imperfections, as they make a work seem more accessible and relatable. I think the three-eyed smiley face is appealing because it's so unexpected. It's an alien face with an extra eye, the kind of thing you might expect to see in a circus sideshow, but it's happy looking out at the viewer. The three-eyed smiley face appears not only happy, but confident and comfortable with itself. While most of us don't have an extra eye, I think it's safe to say that feeling abnormal in some fashion is probably the most normal and universal human experience. We all feel self-conscious and uncomfortable with some aspect of ourselves at some point, but in the simple image of a three-eyed smiley face, we see that abnormalities or an unconventional appearance doesn't need to get in the way of one's happiness. Of course, a big part of that may be because I just hold on to that story of Keith Haring creating it out of a mistake. I also think a lot of art interpretation is, in some ways, a mirror held up to the interpreter. Others see the third eye as a symbol of expanded consciousness or spiritual enlightenment, suggesting an ability to see beyond the surface of reality. Still others view it as a representation of inner vision or intuition, the ability to perceive truths that are not immediately apparent. Given Haring's engagement with social issues, some have also suggested the third eye as a symbol of social awareness, suggesting a heightened ability to perceive and understand the complexities of the world around us. The three eyes may also allude to a kind of all-seeing perspective, a way of looking at the world that embraces multiple viewpoints. It's also worth considering the potential influence of various cultural and artistic traditions on Haring's use of that third eye. The concept of the third eye is present in various spiritual and philosophical traditions, particularly Hinduism and Buddhism, where it's often associated with wisdom, intuition, and enlightenment. While Haring never explicitly cited these traditions as direct influences, it's possible that they contributed to his understanding and use of the symbol. Also, surrealist artists, who Haring admired, explored themes of altered perception and inner realities, often using symbolic imagery to represent these concepts. Ultimately, the meaning of Haring's three-eyed smiley face remains open to interpretation. This ambiguity is a hallmark of his work. I mean, it's not an accident or a failing that his figures so often were reduced to just bubbles, shapes of figures. I mean, it's like one step above a stick figure. That simplicity, the elimination of details and specificity, would make them symbols of people that would be open to interpretation and connection to any and all people from different times, different cultures, bringing their own associations to read into them. He invites viewers to engage with his images on a personal level and draw their own conclusions. The three-eyed smiley face's enduring popularity suggests that it continues to resonate with audiences across cultures and generations. Whether interpreted as a symbol of spiritual awareness, social consciousness, or simply a playful subversion of a familiar image, the three-eyed smiley face has become an iconic representation of Keith Haring's unique artistic vision and his enduring legacy. It continues to radiate its message of hope, awareness, and the power of art to connect us all. Because art is for everyone. This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.